Welcome to my English class, planned by Miss NguyĩnThanhThuỷ on BNN channel. Now play a game. Watch the pictures of different kinds of movies and then match different kinds of movies with the pictures. Now, watch 10 pictures carefully. Now picture 1. Cartoon film. Cartoon film. 2. Love story film. Love story film. 3. Action film. Action film. 4. Detective film. Detective film. 5. Science fiction film. Science fiction film. 6. Documentary film. Documentary film. 7. Crime film. Crime film. 8. Funny film. Funny film. 9. Historical film. Historical film. 10. Horror film. Horror film. Films: science fiction film, cartoon film, funny film, crime film, horror film, action film, documentary film, historical film, detective film, and love story film. Today we will study English 10, Unit 13, Films and Cinema, Part A, Reading, on BNN channel. Before read the basics. Guess the meaning of new words. Now look at the basics. Listen to the tab and try to follow. Now listen.
The history of what we call cinema today began in the early 19th century. At that time, scientists discovered that when a sequence of still pictures were set in motion, they could give the feeling of movement. In the first 2 decades of its existence, the cinema developed rapidly. In those early days, films were little more than moving photographs, usually about 1 minute in length. By 1905, however, films were about 5 or 10 minutes long. They used changes of scene and camera positions to tell a story, with actors playing character parts. In the early 1910s, audiences were able to enjoy the first long films. But it wasn't until 1915 that the cinema really became an industry. From that time, filmmakers were prepared to make longer and better films, and build special places where only films were shown. The cinema changed completely at the end of the 1920s. This was when sound was introduced. The change began in America and soon spread to the rest of the world. As the old silent films were being replaced by spoken ones on the screen, a new cinema form appeared, the musical cinema.
Now we will study vocabulary. Sequence, sequence, sequence. Look at the pictures. Sequence, sequence. Still, still, still. The green rose is in still, but the red rose is in motion, 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 motion. Still, motion, still, motion. Sheen, sheen, sheen. Sheen. Camera, 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 camera. Actor, actor, actor. He is an actor, but she is an actress, 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 actor, actress. In film, he is a character in film. Character, character. Actor, actress. Character, character. Audience, audience, audience. They are audiences. Filmmaker, filmmaker, filmmaker. He is a filmmaker. Filmmaker. Replace, replace, replace. An old building. Replaces. Is an old building is replaced by a new building. Replace, replace, replace. screen, screen, screen. Did this screen, screen, screen. Now listen and repeat. Sequence. Remember stress in the first syllables or second or third. Sequence, sequence. Still, still, still. Motion, motion, motion. Scene, scene, scene. Camera, camera, camera. Actor, actor, actor. Character, character, character. Audience, audience, audience. Filmmaker, filmmaker, filmmaker. Replace, replace, replace. Screen, screen, screen. Now one more. Sequence, still, motion, scene, camera, actor, character, audience, filmmaker, replace, screen. Why read? Now listen the basics again.
The history of what we call cinema today began in the early 19th century. At that time, scientists discovered that when a sequence of still pictures were set in motion, they could give the feeling of movement. In the first 2 decades of its existence, the cinema developed rapidly. In those early days, films were little more than moving photographs, usually about 1 minute in length. By 1905, however, films were about 5 or 10 minutes long. They used changes of scene and camera positions to tell a story, with actors playing character parts. In the early 1910s, audiences were able to enjoy the first long films. But it wasn't until 1915 that the cinema really became an industry. From that time, filmmakers were prepared to make longer and better films and build special places where only films were shown. The cinema changed completely at the end of the 1920s. This was when sound was introduced. The change began in America and soon spread to the rest of the world. As the old silent films were being replaced by spoken ones on the screen, a new cinema form appeared, the musical cinema.
Now test 1. Decide whether these statements are true or false. Now first of all, you should read this statement carefully. The history of cinema today began in the early 19th century. By 1905, films were about 5 or 10 minutes long. In the early 1920s, audiences were able to enjoy the first long films. Until 1915, the cinema really became an industry. The cinema changed completely at the end of 1920s. Now we work together. The first test. The history of cinema today began in the early 18th century. Now look at in the basis. The histories of what we call cinema today began in the early 19th century. Is this clue? So number 1, true or false? False. The histories of cinema today began in the early 19th century. 2. By 1905, film was about 5 or 10 minutes long. Look at the clue. By 1905, however, films was about 5 or 10 minutes long. So number 2, true or false? 2. By 1905, film was about 5 or 10 minutes long. Number 3. In the early 1920s, audiences was able to enjoy the first long films. Now look at the clue. In the early 1910s, audiences was able to enjoy the first long films. Number 3, true or false? False. In the early 1910s, audiences were able to enjoy the first long films. Number 4. Until 1915, the cinema really became an industry. Now look at the clue. But it was not until 1915 that the cinema really became an industry. So number 4, true or false? True. Until 1915, the cinema really became an industry. Number 5. The cinema traced completely at the end of 1920s. Now look at the clue. The cinema traced completely at the end of 1920s. So number 5, 2. The cinema traced completely at the end of 1920s. Now try to correct your mistakes or finish your work. Now task 2. Answer this question. Now read the question carefully and focus on main words or phrases. When did the history of cinema begin? Did film in the early days have sound? When was audiences able to see long films? When was sound introduced? What forms of film appeared as the old silent films were replaced by spoken ones? Now question 1. When does history of cinema begin? Look at the clue. The history of what we call cinema today began in the early 19th century. So the answer is the history of cinema began in the early 19th century. Question 2. Did film in the early days have sound? Look at the clue. The cinema changed completely at the end of the 19th. This was when sound was introduced, as the old silent film was being replaced by spoken one. So the answer is no, they didn't. Question 3. When was audiences able to see long films? Now look at the clue. In the early 1910s, audiences were able to enjoy the first long films. The answer is they were able to see long films in the early 1910s. Question 4. When was sound introduced? Look at the clue. The cinema changed completely at the end of the 1920s. This was when sound was introduced. The answer is the sound was introduced at the end of the 1920s. Question 5. What forms of films appear as the old silent film was being replaced by spoken one? Now look at the clue. As the old silent film was being replaced by spoken ones on the screen, a new cinema form appeared, the musical cinema. So the answer is the musical films appear, or the musical films is correct answer. Now, try to correct the mistakes or finish your work. When did the history of cinema begin? When did the history of cinema begin? The history of cinema began in the early 19th century. Question 2. Did film in the early days have sound? No, they didn't. 3. When were audiences able to see long films? They were able to see long films in the early 1910s. When was sound introduced? The sound was introduced at the end of the 1920s. Number 5. What forms of film appear as the old silent film was replaced by spoken ones? The musical films, or the musical films appear. After read, now match the periods of time with the information given. We have 5 periods of time: 19th century, 1905, 1910s, 1915, and 1920. And 5 information given. In 1905, films were about 5 or 10 minutes long. Early films lasted only 1 minute. The first long film were made. In the early 19th century, the history of film began. Cinema really became an industry. Sound was introduced and the musical cinema appeared. Now try to match. We work together. "19th century. In the early 19th century, the history of cinema began. 1905. In 1905, films were about from 5 to 10 minutes long. Early film lasted only 1 minute. 1910s. The first long films were made. 1915. Cinema really became an industry. 1920. Sound was introduced and the musical cinema appeared. Now try to finish. Now, remember histories of films and cinema. First of all, silent films. And then, spoken films. And then, musical films. Try to remember. Thank you very much for your attention. You should, after reading lesson, you should practice reading the basics and learn by heart new words or vocabulary. Goodbye, see you next time on BNN channel.